Hi, I'm Rachel Blank. I am the founder and CEO of Allara. Today on Ever Forward Radio, I am talking about how Allara is the first virtual care platform for women with polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, and how we are designing a new collaborative chronic care model to help improve women's healthcare outcomes.
Three, two, one.
All right, Rachel, welcome to Everforward Radio. I'm super excited to have you here and to dive deeper into a really unique method of delivering healthcare for specific people, but kind of revamping the whole telemedicine model in general. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I got to ask, first things first, where did this idea come from? I'm always intrigued by people that are creating something and especially making something better, maybe something we're already familiar with, such as telemedicine. Where did this idea come from? Why is it so important for you to make this healthcare delivery process so much better?
Yeah, so the idea for Allara really came out of my own personal journey. I was diagnosed with something called Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, which is a hormonal condition that affects about 1 in 10 women when I was 20 years old. So about 10 years ago. And I was diagnosed after struggling with unexplained health issues for a number of years. And I would say for the past 10 years, I've really struggled to find healthcare that met my needs when it came to managing this chronic condition. So PCOS, for those who don't know, can affect everything from your skin to your weight. We see both a lot of hormonal imbalances. So women with PCOS tend to have more testosterone, and most of them have insulin resistance, which can lead to a lot of medical issues, including type 2 diabetes down the line, high cholesterol, in addition to all of the kind of lifestyle issues that you might have. And yet, even though it's this very common condition, I really had never found great medical care for it. I would go to the gynecologist one year, they would tell me one thing. I would go to a different gynecologist the next year, they would tell me something different. And it just felt like I really never knew where to go to get answers. And so over the past few years, I really started to think about it more seriously. But kind of the only place I knew where to turn was the internet and to start doing my own research. And I found myself in, Reddit groups for women with PCOS, which frankly sounds a little bit ridiculous, that we're kind of treating our healthcare with Reddit groups. And also found myself, on Instagram, looking at Instagram influencers who were telling me things like, don't eat dairy, don't eat gluten, that'll solve your issues, which by the way, I tried, it doesn't work, scientifically not proven at all. And it just felt like there was really nowhere to go that brought everything together, that brought together the medical aspect of things, that brought together the holistic nutrition and lifestyle piece, and also nothing that really was able to work with you over time. And frankly, it was kind of just this aha moment of, really nothing else exists out there to help women like me. Why don't I just build something better? Why don't I just build this thing that I've been searching for? And that really was the impetus to build Allara last year, was to build what I call a chronic collaborative care platform for PCOS. So if you think about that, really what we're trying to solve is, number one, the very kind of episodic nature of healthcare. So instead of going to your doctor once a year, not being tracked over time, for somebody with a chronic condition, making those touch points much more frequent, and being able to help manage your chronic condition, but also making it more collaborative. So not keeping, your dermatologist separate from your gynecologist, separate from your nutritionist, but having a care team of practitioners who can all work together to help you meet your care needs. So on our platform, we have both a gynecologist that you're working with, but we also have a registered dietitian that you're working with, and they're working together to help you meet your goals.
That sounds amazing. Before we kind of dive into the details of the platform and how it works, I want to kind of take the listener back to those early moments when you just felt like, I shouldn't feel like this. Many of us have been there. We've had an acute injury or illness or chronic illness, and it's kind of rare in my experience that it just pops up one day. Usually we kind of have these little whispers, I say, that are, our body's whispering to us that, hey, we need to be focusing more on this, less on that. And all of a sudden it starts screaming at us because it's all compounded. So that maybe someone can pay attention to their body right here, right now, today. What were some of those whispers you were experiencing? How did you really know that something was just not right?
Yeah. I mean, to start it off, not to go too TMI, but I was getting maybe one period a year for many years. So 1 or 2 periods a year, which is very abnormal. But I think especially as women, we're conditioned, not to complain about things, only to bring things up if they seem really serious. And so I just never really talk to anybody about the fact that I was having these really irregular cycles. It was only when I started having issues that, some really serious gastrointestinal issues that I
Mm.
couldn't ignore. Actually, that was how they diagnosed my PCOS, was just an ultrasound that happened to be for something else. And so it was almost a surprise diagnosis to me. And so over the years, I kind of feel like I tried everything under the sun to help manage my symptoms. I've been on metformin, I've been on birth control, I tried gluten and dairy free, I tried not doing HIIT workouts anymore, I tried only doing Pilates, I tried doing more HIIT workouts. Like, there kind of is, if you have a question, it seems like there are 10 different answers out there about what you can and can't do when you're trying to manage it. And I tried everything and nothing felt like it was working. And I think really that was because there wasn't one place I could go that said, okay, here is, the scientifically backed thing that you should do to treat your condition. Oh, and by the way, your use case of PCOS or your case of
Mm.
PCOS might be a little different than somebody else's case of PCOS. So maybe what you're doing should be a little different than what someone else is doing. And it's not so blanket and cookie cutter. But kind of by listening to all these different voices on the internet, again, because of a lack of any other option, I just found myself really frustrated for years trying to figure out, what to do and how to manage it. And I think really it was just making myself sicker.
And you weren't finding in your experience of trying things, letting go of other things, talking to certain providers, you weren't finding that anybody else on a healthcare team were connecting the dots for you. It was just kind of lonely islands out there, and they thought that was the best approach.
Yeah, I think that really is, a lot of the issue with our healthcare system today is it is so siloed. So it is really hard to connect all the dots when they're all sitting in different places. So again, take the example of a woman with PCOS. Maybe she has acne and she's going to her dermatologist to ask about her acne. Well, number one, if her dermatologist doesn't know that it's this hormonal basis of acne, they might not even be treating that acne properly. Then she goes to her gynecologist and says, hey, my periods are irregular. I'm a little bit worried about my fertility. Like, should we talk about this? But if they don't also know about, those symptoms like acne that her dermatologist is seeing, then they might not really have that full picture to put it together. And right now, really, our providers aren't talking to each other in a traditional healthcare setting. And that, again, was really this vision of this collaborative care model, was to have a place where providers can all kind of connect the dots with each other. And we actually see that women with PCOS on average take 2 to 3 years and multiple doctors to get a diagnosis, partially because
It takes that long.
it takes that long to get a
Wow.
diagnosis,
Wow.
because you're going to so many different places and nobody's connecting the dots for you.
So you're kind of just running from one specialist to another, one doctor to another, one nutritionist to another. I mean, I'm sure you were trying anything and everything, and it was just ping ponging all around.
Yeah, exactly. It really is just kind of, again, I've talked to women who say, I feel like I basically have to have a medical degree to manage this condition, because you really are, managing everything yourself. You're self-advocating. I've talked to women who are tracking their lab work on spreadsheets because, again, there's really nothing that exists for them that keeps everything in one place and helps them really kind of have this central point of care. And again, I don't think any of this is on the physicians, right? I don't think any physician is trying to provide subpar care, but if they don't have all of the pieces of information that they need, and also if they're not tracking you over a period of time, then it's really hard for them to deliver the right care.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. I think a doctor, a specialist, a provider, someone comes in and presents with A, B, and C symptoms, their job, how they're trained, unless they already are in some kind of collective, some comprehensive healthcare team, they're only going to work with what they got. And so
Right.
I think it's a fair point, not to knock every provider for missing the mark here, but they're just doing the best that they can, most likely. But I'm wondering, this is a great solution for the patient, great solution for you, great solution for somebody who wants this kind of unified front to their healthcare and problem solving for their wellness. But how easy has it been to get all of these providers, specialists, doctors to come together? Because I would think they would have done this by now.
So I like to say the issue isn't in the providers, the issue is in the venue and the tools that they're being given. So think about a traditional gynecologist visit. I realize you probably haven't had experience with this.
No, not
but
so much. Personally, no.
but traditionally, you go to your gynecologist, you have maybe 10 minutes with them, right? They have to get through everything that you need for your annual visit. Let's say you have a more complex care situation like polycystic ovary syndrome. They don't really have time in that 10 minutes to go over everything they need for your annual visit and also dive into the complexities of your care needs for the next year. It just really isn't the right venue for that. And so when we go to gynecologists and we say, would you like to join our platform? You actually are going to have an onboarding visit where you have 30 minutes with the patient. You can go over in depth everything that they need to know. Then you'll order lab work, then you'll have a follow-up visit. The venue just allows for a much better standard of care that the provider wanted to provide before, but just couldn't do within the constraints of that traditional healthcare model. And we're also seeing that providers are really excited about this idea of the collaborative care model. So again, traditionally, it's not that they wouldn't want their patients to also work with a registered dietitian. It's that it can be very hard to actually, have that ongoing relationship where they're speaking to the registered dietitian and they're collaborating with them. Most electronic medical record systems don't actually speak to each other. So it can be very hard to pass information back and forth. And so by giving them the tools to actually have those collaborative care conversations in a way that's much easier and much more seamless, is something that actually is really exciting to them. And so we found incredible excitement among the provider community. And I think the other reason that they're so excited is, the women that we're talking about are facing some very serious healthcare comorbidities. So the vast majority of women with PCOS are obese. Over half of them will develop type 2 diabetes by the time that they're 40. They're also at increased risk of gestational diabetes, increased risk of high cholesterol if they're not on, hormones like birth control to help manage their menstrual cycles, increased risk of endometrial and uterine cancer. And so, for physicians, it is really important to them that we help these women get their health better under control, and that we have a better way to improve these outcomes for them.
You kind of remind me of life before podcasting. I used to be a clinical health coach, and I ran the wellness department that was adjacent to a part of this kind of collective of healthcare providers. It was a concierge medical practice, and it just blew my mind when I found this job years ago that this is exactly everything that I'm looking for. This is what I want. This is what I find value in. Complementary and alternative medicine, fitness, nutrition approach to, let me get my labs, let me get my physical, let me go in if I have A, B, and C symptom. And it was so just like a breath of fresh air. And honestly, so promising for me as a human being to see that this could be the future of how I get well and stay well. But it was all in-house. And it was me working side by side with their primary care provider, their nurse practitioner, whoever, to kind of go over all of these things. And that was working, but there was still some like newness. There was still some paradigm butting of heads a little bit. So I'm really curious. I know the friction that I had, I know the success that I had in-house working together in person. What have been some of the paradigm butting of heads, if you will, when you're working on a remote platform? Is it a technology barrier, a communication barrier, or is it just really everything on the back end that you all go through to just, I guess vet is the right word here, to vet these to make sure that it is a cohesive collective team approach?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'm really glad that you had that experience, because I think you'll agree, I think that is the way that healthcare should be, right? Like if we're talking
Yeah,
about a
absolutely.
patient who is pre-diabetic, if we're only treating, if we're only treating their insulin resistance with medication, that's not going to be successful. If we're only treating their, nutrition and lifestyle issues, but not helping them with the insulin resistance, they're probably not going to be successful. You really need this kind of integrated team approach that combines the medical aspect and the nutrition and lifestyle aspect. So I totally agree that that is kind of the future, and that is the vision, is being able to scale that And that's why we are doing it all virtually, is so that you're not limited to being within the geographical range of a practice like that, that really anybody in the country can have access to that standard of care, which is where we should all be at. To answer your question on the difficulties of telehealth, first off, I think I would have answered this question differently 2 years ago, but
Oh
COVID has
yeah.
really accelerated the adoption of telehealth.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago, I think for a lot of our physicians, this would have been very difficult to comprehend, right? Like, I don't think they would have been able to visualize treating a patient with such complex care needs all virtually before the rise of COVID. But once COVID hit, we all had to learn how to use telehealth. All doctors all of a sudden had to understand, how to use telehealth. And I think it also really showed us the value of telehealth and how much really can be done, and really how it can really be used to scale access to care to a lot of patient populations that otherwise wouldn't have had that access. And so, I think for us, I don't know that the difficulties are that different than they would be in an in-person care setting. For us, it really is, I think, to one of your points, number one, making sure that the providers that we're hiring, whether they are registered dietitians or nurse practitioners or OBGYNs, are incredibly talented providers who both have an expertise in the care that they're providing, but also frankly have an empathetic bedside manner that will enable them to really serve the needs of their patients in a caring, empathetic way. We see that really makes a huge difference in these patient populations. And the second is, really giving them the tools to collaborate and communicate with each other. So yes, you can't pop over to their desk, but how do we think about using, messaging tools so that we can all see a patient's concerns, so that both the registered dietitian can see what the medical provider is prescribing, and vice versa, the medical provider can see what the dietitian is prescribing. So it's really for us about building those technical tools to allow all of our providers to communicate with each other.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm sure this next question is probably going to be very case by case dependent, but since you do have such a unified front of complementary alternative medicine, I guess, as some people would describe it, modern, doctors, physicians, providers, NPs, nutritionists, dietitians, that's a lot of things coming at somebody. Everybody's different, like you were just saying earlier. In your experience thus far, have you found that some of the best results you're seeing with people managing, treating, working through PCOS, is it more nutrition? Is it more other chronic illness and disease influencing it? Is it more, hey, just something acute we need to get medical attention to? Is there any kind of common thread here that you all have experienced that maybe a listener could take home and maybe focus on first?
Yeah. So I would say the vast majority of our patients are struggling with kind of the metabolic aspect of the disease. So, struggling with obesity, struggling with being pre-diabetic, and understanding that they are pre-diabetic, wanting to know, how they can help prevent their problem from getting worse. And I think that is actually what's really exciting to me about this platform, is the opportunity to have preventative care. So PCOS is not curable. There's no cure right now. There's no one medication that you can take for it. But because we know what you are at higher risk of, we can help you avoid some of those downstream effects. So if we know that you are significantly more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than the regular patient population, let's kind of work backwards and help avoid you ever getting to that point, and take a much more preventative care approach. So again, for us, I think really the value that you aren't getting many other places is in the combination of care. So it's in having a registered dietitian who can actually see your lab work, right? Because most of the time, if you're going to a registered dietitian, they're not necessarily getting that kind of full picture of your lab work. What does your cholesterol look like? What does your testosterone look like? What does your insulin look like? Your registered dietitian actually gets all of that information and can develop a much more personalized nutrition plan for you based off of that. And similarly, your physician having all that information can prescribe you medication that helps support that care plan. So I think really kind of the quote unquote secret sauce for us is in that collaborative care model. But I think, the thing that's kind of the starting place that we find has the most impact, and this sounds very silly, is just in kind of the empathy and validation to start. I think a lot of women come to us and they feel almost like they've been made to feel crazy. And I think you hear this a lot in a woman's healthcare experience. They'll go to the doctor and they'll feel They'll feel judged, they'll feel invalidated. The doctor might say something like, well, just go lose weight. Okay, well, how are you supposed to go lose weight? If you're delivering that without any empathy, without any care, that doesn't really set the patient up for success. And so really just starting from a place of, we validate you, we see you, we understand you, and we're empathetic to you, I think is just a massive difference in a starting place that enables a patient to really take the next step and get healthier. So I would encourage, anybody out there who feels like they have had that experience where they felt dismissed or they felt judged, to frankly become their own advocate and to either go back to that doctor and say, I've done some research, here's what I think I might have, can you run this test for me? Or find a different doctor who's willing to come from that place of empathy. But we shouldn't be in a place in our healthcare system where women are just getting kind of dismissed for their concerns.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Encouraging someone and educating them and empowering them with information and tools and resources to kind of become their biggest health advocate themselves, I'm all for. But sometimes that can backfire. I'm sure, we go into a doctor's office and like I found on WebMD, I looked up this and these are the things that I think that I have, or what I want you to look up, or how I want you to treat it, or this is the medication that I need. Where do you kind of stand, or what is your thought on that fine line of educating and empowering and encouraging them to be their biggest health advocate, but also just being mindful of the fact that, hey, we now have this great team. So, maybe put the WebMD down a little bit.
I would actually say overall, I would encourage more women to be health advocates for themselves. I think, if we look kind of statistically, it goes more the other way, which is that women are less likely to advocate for their healthcare needs. They're less likely to be kind of that pushy person. And so I think, arming yourself with more education, going to your physician with more questions is probably not going to hurt. That being said, once they give you answers, you probably should kind of defer to the expertise. So if they tell you that you have, I don't know, a thyroid condition, you probably shouldn't go back in WebMD and think that you have cancer.
Yeah,
But I would say, overall, I do think that we have an issue in American healthcare with kind of the way that certain groups, and it's not just women, by the way, right? We see disparate healthcare outcomes for populations based off race, based off sexual identity, based off socioeconomic status. And I think, unfortunately, if you fall into one of those groups, you have to be ready to advocate for yourself a little bit more. And I, would encourage women, especially, to do research on what they're experiencing and to find a doctor who's willing to listen to them. That's the other thing. If you go to a doctor and they say, oh, I can't believe you're asking me 5 questions, like, just be done, here's a prescription, you're
Red
probably
flag.
not with the right doctor.
Yeah.
Right.
Besides creating this phenomenal platform, I'm curious, would you be willing to share, how did you become a bigger, or even for the first time, an advocate for your own healthcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, first of all, I think I had a bit of a unique experience in that I grew up with a dad who's an OBGYN. So I grew up kind of, I think, with a different exposure to the healthcare system than
A little bit of a leg up, I'd
people.
say. Yeah.
A little bit like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
quite literally, if I wanted to go to the specialist, I would call and say, hey, my name's Rachel Blank, I want to make an appointment. And they would say, oh, okay, it'll be like 2 months to get in. So I'd call my dad would make a call. They would call me back and say, oh, so sorry, like, when do you want to come in? And I think, I think for me, though, it really showed, like, you can have very different healthcare experiences depending on who you have access to. And again, it goes back to kind of like, what circumstances were you born into can really affect your healthcare outcomes, which should not be the case.
It truly is just access for so many people, for healthcare, for food deserts. It's just, unfortunately, it's what was the hand you were dealt in order to, is it going to be easier or harder to get access to even to begin your wellness journey? Yeah.
Right. 100%. And, especially, we've seen during COVID, really these disparate healthcare outcomes, kind of based off where you're at. And so for me, I would say it was less that I felt a disadvantage and more that because I had experienced what an advantage it can be to have that special access, I almost felt a responsibility to other women. So I kind of felt like, because I knew how different your healthcare outcomes can be if you know what questions to ask, if you know who can make the call for you. I actually wanted to help build that better experience for other women and really kind of extend the help that I've been given to other women who really didn't have that help and didn't have that access.
And I know this isn't your first rodeo. This isn't your first time having a great idea and running with it, and creating something to have lasting impact and value to other people. I'd love to let's shift gears a little bit into kind of this entrepreneurial lens. What was so unique about this that you felt like this has to be my next thing? This is my next new shiny object. What was so appealing about this platform, about this mission, that had you kind of jump ship from everything else that you've done in the past?
Yeah. So, that's a great question. So I'd been working in digital health for a few years. And I think the funny thing is I was going through all of these personal healthcare questions, especially as I was getting older, starting to think about my fertility, because with PCOS, it's very likely that you will need some sort of medical intervention to get pregnant. As I hit 30, I really started to think about that, started to do my own research, but it was almost like, it sounds crazy in hindsight, but it was almost living in a silo, right? I was going to work every day, working on digital health, using telehealth to expand access to care for people all around the country. And then on my own, I was sitting on Reddit trying to figure out what diet I should be on to help improve
like,
my
do as I say,
fertility.
not as I do. Yeah.
Exactly. And I just remember distinctly one day last summer sitting on the computer. I think I probably was like watching some influencer video where she was telling women not to eat gluten or dairy, which is my biggest pet peeve. And I just thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. Something needs to be done about this. And I had this aha moment of, if literally anybody can fix this, as the daughter of a gynecologist who has PCOS, who's worked in digital health, I don't actually know that anybody else can fix it the way that I can. And I almost felt like, again, going back to this idea of having this unique experience, like a responsibility to build something better for other women. And, not just to find a solution for myself, but to use everything I'd learned, to use all of my skills to build a better platform. And it was kind of this moment of, I can't not build this. If I truly think I can change the lives of hundreds of thousands, millions of women, how can I not go do that? And so that was what kind of inspired me to quit my job and build Allara, which I do truly believe can change healthcare outcomes for women across the country.
And we're really glad that you did. Absolutely. This is, I love seeing steps in this direction for health technology, for access, for just language, like understanding, helping people not only get access, but to help understand. You were talking about this earlier about how you got to kind of have a degree in, medical terminology, it seems, to not only understand what you're looking up on your own, but when you're going to a provider, a specialist, just to interpret that data. It's just being chucked at us for so long. Speaking of like information, you brought up the whole point of this influencer saying some things that just really made you feel some kind of way. And I think that's really too common for a lot of topics, especially when it comes to our health, wellness, acute, chronic illness, disease. Somebody may have a very large and prominent platform, and they feel compelled to not only just share what is going on in their life, their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, but to even use such language as, hey, this is what you should do as well. I'm all for sharing personal experience here. What I do in my fitness, nutrition, mindset, everything that adds value to my life or is a variable that I'm looking at or want to change, I try to just share that experience. Hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. And here's the process along the way. And maybe here's a result, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. And then that just allows other people to pull from it what they want and apply on their own. I don't think, now as a podcaster, and definitely not before as a clinical health coach, I ever felt the authority to tell anybody just because I had success with something, that's what they should do too. Where would you like to see social media influencers, podcasters, anybody other than a primary care provider or a specialist, where would you like to kind of see that language, that content, all of that mindset even shift so that people become less and less misinformed and are
Yeah.
still pulling from trusted resources?
Yeah, I think, I think for me, I 100% agree, right? There is a value and a place for people sharing what has worked for them personally. I think the thing that is missing is kind of all the context around it. And I think the more that we can share, all of the available information with people, let them become educated, and then help them, kind of be advocates and make their own decisions, the better. For example, if there are influencers who are not just talking about going gluten dairy free, but who talk about how, they don't believe in taking birth control for PCOS. Now, if that's all the information you give, that's not really all of the context a patient needs to make an informed decision, right? What they really need to be told is, well, this person personally didn't want to take birth control, but for a lot of women who aren't menstruating regularly, if you aren't on birth control or some way to manage your hormones, you actually are really increasing your risk of, uterine and endometrial cancer. And that's why a lot of physicians will recommend that you're on birth control if you have PCOS. Now, to be fair, a lot of times it goes the other way, where the doctors don't explain that either. The doctors in these 10-minute rush visits will say, all right, here's a prescription for birth control, not explain the context or the reasoning behind it. And then a patient is, that's probably exactly what happened to these influencers who are saying that they don't want to be on it. And so really from both sides, right, we're not getting all the context and all the information. I think really by sharing kind of the why behind things. Why did I personally, choose to go gluten and dairy free? What scientific research is there to support that? Why should you consider being on birth control or not being on birth control? I think just giving the actual context behind it, as opposed to these blanket statements, and then letting people decide for themselves, is incredibly important. Also, frankly, I think, it's interesting because there's a lot of rules around what, for example, a physician can say to a patient, or what a registered dietitian can say to a patient.
The scope
but
of
there
practice defines everything that they can or cannot say. Yeah.
Exactly. But there are no rules if you're just a random person on the internet and want to say something to people and give medical care. So, I think a little more disclosures around like what kind of degrees you have and what you should or should not be saying would be helpful. But, again, I think for me, it's really about how do we give people the most context, the most education, the most scientifically backed information as possible. And then from there, they can make their own decisions, but they really should be armed with those resources first.
I agree. And besides my background and professional history, I have a little bit of a leg up too. My wife is a nurse practitioner. So anything that I'm scratching my head about or I'm worried about the terminology, I'm just like, hey, what can I say about blah, blah, blah? And she helps me out there. Where maybe in your personal experience or just in general, whatever you prefer to share, when we address, I think when we address one area of our health and our wellness, let's say it's PCOS or we have an acute issue we're focusing on. It's because it's more top of mind, it's more serious maybe, or we are taking it more seriously. But oftentimes that kind of allows for a ripple effect of other wellness benefits.
Yeah.
I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, in focusing on managing your PCOS, you have found other ways that have added value to your life. Maybe weight loss, weight gain, maybe metabolism, maybe blood sugar, maybe sleep. Can you shine a light on anything that you have found that by focusing on managing PCOS, you have seen other health benefits pop up?
Yeah. I think one philosophy that we take at Allara that I actually have tried to implement into my own life and I found incredibly helpful is to focus more on health and more on health goals. So for example, you'll see a lot of women, and I definitely fell into this bucket, say, I want to lose 10 pounds. Okay, if all you're focusing on is losing 10 pounds, you're probably not going to be that successful. But if you then go have a consult with your nutritionist, you tell her about your diet and she says, all right, let's set 3 goals for this month. Your 3 goals are going to be, walking 30 minutes a day, incorporating X grams of fiber into your diet, and, eating like a healthy protein, a fat, and a carb in every meal together, right? Those are things that you actually can tangibly focus on and do. And as a result, you probably will lose weight. You probably will become healthier, but we've given you a much more sustainable way to go about it in a way that actually reverberates, throughout the rest of your healthcare. So if you're just focusing on losing 10 pounds, maybe you're doing that in an unsustainable, unhealthy way. If you're focusing on, how do I be healthier? What are these goals and steps I can take to be healthier? That then has a ripple effect that kind of helps, the rest of your health ecosystem. And so, that honestly was one of the biggest mindset shifts for me that I found incredibly helpful, and that we implement at Allara is focusing more on, how do I be healthy? What steps do I take to be healthier? Knowing my own personal health needs, what should I shift in my lifestyle, or what should I shift in the way I'm approaching my health to help improve that, and to be less focused on kind of the vanity metrics, let's say.
What about the other side of the coin? Have you found, in pursuit of something that you personally want to try or think is going to benefit you, maybe particularly benefit managing your PCOS, or under the advisement of a primary care provider or specialist, kind of backfired? Maybe, this is supposed to be a healthy approach to
Yep.
X, but for you and your body, it actually wasn't.
Yeah, I think that is partially why I have such an issue now with these blanket statements around restrictive eating that a lot of women, and especially women with PCOS, get. So again, in this kind of course of trying to figure out my PCOS, I fell into a lot of restrictive eating habits. I would even say my relationship with food became a little bit unhealthy, which is the point where,
Really?
I wouldn't even eat an apple because it had too many carbs. And I wasn't seeing the results I wanted. I was kind of miserable. My energy wasn't where I wanted it to be. And I ended up consulting a nutritionist who said, you're really not eating the way your body needs. So for example, you've been told to go gluten-free. Really, you need fiber. Tell me how many grams of fiber in the gluten-free bread you're eating versus how many grams of fiber are in a slice of whole wheat bread. And a slice of whole wheat bread has a lot more fiber, will keep you a lot more satiated, and will just overall kind of, frankly, like make you more full and satisfied. And I found really by kind of letting go of a lot of those restrictive diet patterns, by focusing more on, intuitive eating. How do I tune into what my body needs? How do I think about meals that are, satiating, that have fiber, that have a mix of, carbs, proteins, and fats? Not only did my relationship with food become a lot healthier, but I actually started to see better results than when I was on this very restrictive eating path.
Really? Wow. Like what, for example, anything specific, or just kind of an overall qualitative state?
So, I mean, like, for example, I actually didn't like, so I'm very kind of like, I guess I have lean type PCOS to begin with. So I hate to focus on the weight aspect, but I definitely noticed like a difference in my body. I noticed I looked a lot leaner when I stopped obsessing about food and cutting out things like gluten. And I also really just noticed a difference in my energy levels. I felt better energy. I didn't have as many cravings at night. There were nights when I was doing the restrictive eating patterns where I was, binge eating every so often, because you're in this restrictive
Wow.
eating pattern and then you want to binge. Versus when I
Yeah.
really focused on, whole meals, like thinking about things like fiber and macronutrients, a lot of those issues went away. And I think that was almost became like why I wanted to help bring this to other people,
Mm.
is, this restrictive eating pattern that we tell women to do to lose weight. It doesn't work.
Well, I'm so glad that you are on your way and have brought such a heightened sense of awareness and attention to your mind, your body. That is, I think, the ultimate goal that I always only ever wanted for my clients, and definitely want for anybody and everybody listening right here, is that there are a lot of ways to kind of go about taking care of yourself, to optimize yourself, to lose weight, gain weight, to take care of medical concerns, but they ultimately are going to boil down to what works for you. And the sooner and the longer we can adhere to that mentality of, I can try things, but my body is not her body, is not his body, is not his mindset, is not my mindset. We have to just keep trying and paying attention. And, through the resources like Allara, through our primary care provider, through our own biofeedback, through our food log, through just how we feel in the morning, how we feel in the evening. There's so many ways to measure this, and to filter down to, all right, this is what my body needs, my body wants for this specific goal, but just to feel freaking good every day. There's no better coach than our own body, I think.
Right. 100%. And that is really why we're building this kind of personalized care platform is there is no one size fits all
Yeah.
answer. And, just because you have the same condition doesn't mean that you should necessarily be on the same set of medications or have the same exact diet. And the way your condition looks might present a little differently, but it really is about how do we find what's right for you based off your individual care needs. And I love that you talked about how you feel, because I agree. I think that's such an important part of it. Is it's not just, the number on the scale or what you look like. It also is about how you feel, and what kind of energy you have and how you feel about yourself that we're trying to help solve as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And kind of getting towards the end here, I know we've been talking a lot about a lot of things with PCOS and bringing, awareness to our body. Can you walk us through exactly what can someone experience when they are on this application, when they are ready to go down this journey of managing PCOS, learning more about PCOS through Allara? What does that process actually look like?
Yeah. So first off, I would just kind of encourage anybody who is looking to learn more about PCOS to either visit our website, allarahealth.com, or check out our Instagram at Allara Health. We have a ton of free educational resources that you can look through to understand more about the condition, more about if it might apply to you. But if you're ready to join the program, somebody on our subscription program is paired with a care team that is specially trained in PCOS. So you are paired with both a physician or a nurse practitioner with a special background in PCOS care, as well as a registered dietitian who has a master's degree and is also trained in PCOS care. So to start, you would onboard with your medical provider. They would do a detailed medical intake for you. They would then run any lab work that you might need to get a fuller picture of your health, whether that's what do your hormones look like? What does your metabolic profile look like? Do we have to worry about prediabetes for you? They then would put you on any medication that they think is relevant. And then you would do your onboarding visit with your registered dietitian, who again would have that full profile of your lab work, of your prescriptions, of what your medical provider thinks, who then would put you on a complimentary nutrition program, again, tailored to your individual needs, and would be available on an ongoing basis to check in with you, to message with you, to make sure that you are sticking to those kind of behavioral based goals that you're setting together. And then from there, you will not only continue to message with your registered dietitian, but you will have follow-up visits on video with both your doctor and your registered dietitian to kind of track over time. So, maybe your care needs when you first start are a little bit different than your care needs 6 months in, a year in. Maybe your care needs when you start
hopefully they are actually, I would say. Hopefully
right,
they are.
exactly. Yeah. Both hopefully they are, but also, maybe a year in, you want to start thinking about getting pregnant, and we can help you think about that versus just thinking about being healthier. So again, the idea is really about kind of personalizing it to whatever journey you're on.
That's amazing. I know this is super specific to the female audience out there, but I mean, I'm excited just to check it out because I love health technology implementation with, the individual and with the healthcare team. Quick little extra fun fact about me, like I was saying back before being a full-time podcaster, this, excuse me, actually a health technology platform is how I made my exit. I really found that there was just this missing link of, all right, I know when the patient, we call them patients, the client would walk out of my office, they would leave their doctor's office. They were either going to do what we talked about or they weren't. And I was like, they would come back, a week later, a month later, a quarter later. And it was, I did it or I didn't kind of thing. And so I actually created a coaching platform, a coaching app to integrate with my clients, my patients in between those visits to just stay in touch, to understand and track quantitative, qualitative feedback. And just there was a lot of work that was done, but I can tell you for a lot of my clients, they would tell me specifically, Chase, just knowing that you were literally in my pocket, you were just here on my smartphone, just knowing that you were just a text away, a message away, or even somewhere like, hey, just that I know that you know what I'm doing or not doing, just, you can see my activity trackers, you can see my food log, or you can check on anything. That was just like this passive level of accountability that helped people finally stay adherent to what they said they were going to do, not just to me, but for them. And so I know this is going to be the same thing. Just having someone who finally feels heard and feels seen
Yep.
and knows that they have the access so quickly and so trustworthily is, I think, just it's so much more valuable than I wonder if you even realize, because this is what people need to just really take a step and to keep taking those steps towards improving their life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, we see it time and time again with our patients. At the core, what do they really need? They need to feel validated and they need to feel supported. And that really is the beauty of technology, as you experience, that it can really extend that support, and it can extend, that care to your everyday life, and not just to your one-off visits that you're having.
Exactly. And extending care to our everyday life, I think, is a great way to kind of segue into our final question here, and becoming more aware of all of these things that we can do to help us live a life ever forward is what the show is all about. So I'm curious, what does that mean to you? How would you say that you live a life ever forward? How do those two words fall on you here today?
Yeah. So two things are coming to mind when I hear ever forward. I think the first is, just personally thinking about, as humans, we are constantly learning, we are constantly evolving. And I know we talked about this earlier in the podcast, but your needs are constantly changing. And so for me, it's about, never being complacent, never just kind of sitting still, but really kind of always being open to learning more, to being curious, and to using that to help improve my own life and the things I'm doing. And the other thing that's coming to mind when I think about ever forward is kind of all moving forward together. And I know this is something I touched on, but to me, throughout my life, it really has been important to not just think about how do I bring myself forward, but how do I bring other women forward? How do I really extend what I've learned and, the privileges that I've had in life to help those around me and to bring those around me forward as well. And so for me, it's not just about, constantly improving myself, but taking those learnings and sharing them with others as well.
Team effort. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's never a right or a wrong answer. So I thank you for your interpretation. Rachel, where can everybody go to learn more about you and Allara? You were talking about, the website. We're of course going to have all that linked down below, but where can somebody go right now to learn more about what we're talking about? Just allara.com.
Yep. Best place to go would be allarahealth.com, or you can find us
allarahealth.com.
you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Allara Health.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again so much for your time today. And best of luck to this new endeavor. Congratulations, relatively new baby out there in the world. And I'm excited for all the amazing benefits it's going to bring to so many people.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it was great chatting with you.